Welcome to the NYC Godcast, where we offer wacky wisdom weekly. Today we are dipping back into our series Nuggets of Knowledge as we look at tidbits of truth for the Christian life. So on today's episode, we are talking about waffling and worship. Stay tuned. So I'm not sure how many years we've been doing Nuggets of Knowledge here on the Godcast. I'm not even sure how many years we've been doing the Godcast. CJ says 3. So because he can't count any higher. But I always enjoy, the general discussion that we have at the round table on these topics. I always love the series. But today I want to kind of turn our attention towards worship. And we're going to talk about Nuggets of Knowledge in regards to worship. So if you had to describe worship to a person who'd never heard the concept, how would you explain it?
It's tricky. Like, is it a saved person?
Ooh.
No context.
No context. I mean, it's just giving thanks to God, like worshiping who God is. It's, yeah.
A good definition can't include the word in the definition.
I know. Listen,
worship is it's to worship.
I wanted to let you know that there was a time I had an F in English and an A in German. So, like, there we are.
Oh, wow.
Here we
How
are.
do you do that?
Yeah, it's good.
I would say to be obedient to God's word.
That's good. That's good.
Those are good.
What did you get in English?
I didn't even take it.
It shows. So, second question: what are some typical ways you guys like to worship?
Like, just like physically, or like just like what?
No context.
No context. Wow, I really like this no context.
I really like you being quiet so I can talk.
I don't like. I mean, like if you're talking about like physicality, like raising your hand and like just
Anything.
crying.
Crying.
Is a thing that people do sometimes.
But what about you? What? That was the only pretext. How do you worship? Or how do you like to worship?
It's kind of odd because I don't consciously think about it while I'm doing it. You know what I mean? It's just like whatever I do is what I do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I guess I would say like worshiping is allowing the Holy Spirit to take charge. Because like I said, to me, it's not I would hope no one in church is just like, this is where I raise my hand.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No.
Chorus.
Yeah, exactly.
Bridge.
Versus. I laugh, but that's not far from the truth.
That's really how it be sometimes.
But I don't know. I guess to me, worshiping is more spirit led because like some people only worship like during a song. You know what I mean? And yet I will find myself worshiping as I'm reading the Bible or as I'm praying. It just turns into worship because that's where the Holy Spirit is directing me.
As a mom of littles, a lot of times I feel like when you think of worship, you think of very like meditated, zoned in. Well, I don't get a whole lot of that right now because I have, a newborn and a toddler. And so a lot of worship is me being like this and smacking, talking like this. Like, it's just one of those things where like you always think it's like very focused in, but I am focused on God. It's just sometimes it looks a little different. Sure.
I think it was Nathan who talks about worship and like it should cost us something. And no, he's squinting. I'm right here. You're not seeing me.
Who said that?
So listening to his series on it kind of changed my perspective. But when I think of worshiping now, I think of more of like when I serve my family or when I'm like doing things that like coming and just raising your hand doesn't really cost me anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's when it costs me something.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So,
Share Nathan with me.
so worship is actually really simple. The meaning of the word worship is literally worth it. Like worship, worth it. That is literally what its meaning is. In fact, it's an act that demonstrates the value of something. And so if you've been in church for any amount of time at all, then there's a chance that you've heard a church service referred to as a worship service, right? And the reason is that in the mind of most saints, the church house is a place where worship typically takes place. And so, as the music plays, the singers sing, the people begin to clap or cry or sing or raise their hand, we claim that's an act of worship. So does anyone at the table know where the first place worship is found in the Bible?
I don't believe
I'm going to go on the limb. Wait.
cheated?
When, I could be wrong on this, but when Abraham was going to take Isaac up to the mountain, and he said to his two friends, "Stay here. Me and the boy are going to go worship."
Do you want to tell him, or should I?
You can tell him. It's your podcast.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay, so
Impressive.
we actually don't find the word worship first used in a church. It's not at a camp meeting. It's not in a revival service. The first time the word worship is found in the Bible is actually in a very unexpected place, as Kevin tells us. So somewhere you'd not expect to look. And yet God seems to go out of his way to point to this story to tell us this is what true worship is. So Kevin's referring to Genesis chapter 22. Let me read it for us. This is what the Bible says. "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they went both together to worship." So the very first time worship is found, it didn't involve a raise of hands. It involved the laying down of a life. It didn't involve pianos and pulpits. It involved knives and altars. Let's bring that back. Abraham had no hymnals. He had no pews. He had no stage. He didn't even have a Bible. And yet verse 5 tells us that Abraham says, I and the lad will go yonder and we will worship. The ironic thing is a lot of times we come to worship services and we ask for a mountaintop experience. Abraham got a true mountaintop experience, but none of us want that. And so the first instance of worship involves a man giving up something of great price, back to your point. It's a laying down what mattered more than anything to him in life. Abraham's worship comes at a time of pain, of sorrow, of heartache, and devastation. Knowing what God had asked him to do, Abraham says, I will worship God anyways. I will worth it. I will worship. So in the Hebrew culture, and you guys may have heard this before, I'm sure you heard this via Nathan, but in the Hebrew culture, there's what's known as the rule of first mention. So it basically means that in order to truly understand the meaning of a word in their language, in the Jewish culture, you have to go back to the first time it's written or the first time it's explained, and that is where you will find the first, the true meaning of that word. So in all of his wisdom, God could have chosen any context to use the first term worship, and yet he chose Abraham and Isaac, laying down of a life. That is where he determined to define the word worship. And so recognize what this means. As Rachel already said, worship is not just a feeling. Worship is faith. Worship is not just a song, it's sacrifice. Worship is not just a testimony, it's a test. Worship is not just an experience, it's to become expendable. The Hebrew word for worship literally means to bow down, to depress, or prostrate oneself. And so this is exactly what Abraham does in the scene. He willingly lays down his life. He lays down his future, his blessings, his promise, his reputation, his family, his lineage. He lays down his very own will. And in doing all of that and laying all of that down, Abraham calls it, he coins this word. He says, what I am doing and laying Isaac on the altar is I am worshiping. True worship comes from a surrendered life laid down, from lowering ourselves, from submitting our lives to the will of our King. It's recognizing just how big he is and how truly small we are. And from that conclusion, we usher our life into his will and we worship. So the irony of the modern day worship service. So again, back to we're here in the we're in the church building in our pews and the music's going and it's all. The irony of the modern day worship service is that, as Rachel said, it actually costs us nothing. It requires nothing of us. Kind of to your point, you can pay no attention or all the attention. Like it costs us nothing. It requires nothing. In fact, a lot of times our worship services in our day, they actually revolve around us instead of around him. It's what we want. It's what we want to feel. It's what we want to hear. It's what we want to experience. It's our comforts. It's all about us with little to nothing to do about him. In fact, the argument could be made that many modern day believers, their form of worship, their worship service has actually become an idol. And so if you recognize this concept with Abraham here, it's something that, like Abraham, God is asking them to lay down before him. Lay down your version of worship. Lay down your box for a worship service. Lay that down before me. And yet, so many Christians in our day are unwilling to lay down the worship, what they call worship, and it becomes an idol to them. It's that thing they're keeping back from God. And so Worship is giving to God anything that proves his worth. It could be a son. It could be your family. It could be your job. It could be the way that you like to worship, the way that you like to enjoy a service. That could be what you're laying down before him. It's laying down anything to God to prove his worth. Even if, like Abraham, it might seem extreme, it might seem off limits, it might be unheard of or uncalled for. If it's true worship, then he's worth it.
Yeah.
So, with that truth in mind, what are some ways, some maybe unexpected ways that you guys like to worship? Rachel already answered. Do you want to reiterate your answer?
Like serving my family or even out back or anything, just putting yourself out there and doing what you don't want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fair.
Felt.
Is that
Like cotton.
like when you stick to Velcro?
Here we
I
go
may
with the
be
flannel
the
boards
oldest
again.
one here, but I try to keep up hip on the lingo.
I think that's even newer than us.
Yeah, you're in the wrong group on this side of the table.
Felt is like saying
We're
same.
millennials.
Yeah.
Oh.
As the old people would say, ditto.
Ditto.
I'm from the ditto generation.
Or just same.
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 Yeah. 90s.
Yes.
80s.
Back at you.
Back at you.
Back at you.
That was like early thousands. Twos of the thousands. Unexpected ways you worship?
Maybe going out of your way to do something for somebody that you don't like.
Like sitting on my podcast. I understand why you wouldn't look me in the eye when you said that.
Have you seen that meme that's like when the preacher's like, you need to be nice to everybody in the church, and then suddenly everyone starts coming up to you after church?
That's not funny.
But yeah, just like doing like what Rachel, basically just reiterating
Yeah.
what Rachel said, just something that it's not what you want to do. It's something that you're willing to do because it's worth it to do it for God.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that makes our flesh uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
we're willing to do it in obedience.
Yep.
Back to your point.
That's a very good point. Like whatever, like if you're gonna go worship and you're like, I really personally like doing this.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm comfortable
Yeah.
in this. You're probably not worshiping.
Yeah.
Well, and even to the small things, like how many of us really on a Monday morning would rather sleep in the morning or actually sacrifice to get up against our flesh's will and read our Bible or pray or spend time in God's word. That can be an act of worship if you recognize he's worth it of me getting up and being tired. He's worth it of me getting up ahead of the sun. He's worth it.
Yep.
And so really anything can be done to prove the worth of God in your life.
I think when you look at it that way, like that's a great point because, like, I know a lot of people have a mindset of like, you know, I can't get up a half an hour before before I would normally get up to go to work. You know what I mean? But because I'll be too tired and you know I work around whatever, I'll be too sleepy to do my job. But I think that if you're waking up to worship God, okay, he's gonna recognize that, and he's
When you
gonna
make him
make
priority.
Well, and just like the story of Abraham, he got him back because he gave him.
Yeah.
Right.
Had Abraham not kept Isaac, I believe Isaac would have died.
Yes.
right, yeah.
And so to the same thing with your half hour, not to compare a half hour of your day to your son, but in the same way, if you would lay that down before him, he may give you an extra half hour in the day you never expected to have.
Exactly. Yes. He's gonna make a way.
Yeah.
For you to get through your day, even though you don't think you can get through your day because you'll be so tired.
I don't remember if it was Andrew Murray. It's one of the old dead guys, but they would always say, I have too much to do for the Lord not to give him the first hour.
Yeah.
And so basically, if I were to spend that first hour getting things done, I wouldn't get it all done. But if I give him the first hour, he'll give me more ability to get it all done.
Right. That's a very good point.
So how do you guys, and this may be again more of the same question, but how do you guys prove your worship? How do you prove he's worth it in your life? What are some things you do with that lens? How do you prove his worth it, his worship?
Testifying.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to do it because, like, you can tell Bible stories until you're blue in the face to someone, and they're gonna just be like, well, you know, that's nice for Job. And, you know what I mean? I'm good for Paul. Yeah. You know what I mean? But when you can personalize it and make it about, you know, not about you, but you can like show them how like this had to be God at work in my life. Therefore, it can be in your life too. Because, you know what I mean? Like, even like I found out teaching LifeWise is that like, though we all will say Jesus was the only perfect person, I think a lot of times, particularly younger people, like when you talk about other heroes of the Bible, they kind of look at them almost in the same reference as they do Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, of course they could do it because what? They were no different than you or I. So when you can testify to someone like your story, your personal.
Well, and I think with that, I've thought a lot about this. I think even with that, sharing your flaws. The Bible goes out of its way to exploit the flaws of all those people. But so often when we share our testimony, it's all the shiny parts.
Yeah.
If you would actually exploit yourself, share your failures, like how you can't talk, share those kinds of things, share the ways that you struggle and you fail. That's actually a way of worship. Why? Because you're showing that God uses a broken vessel, and yet God is worth it of showing how unworthy and undeserving I am. And so I think it's Andrew Murray who always says that his highness brings our lowness.
Yeah.
And so the more he's exalted, the more we show he's worth it, worship, the lower we will actually become. But a lot of times, I think, just like to Kevin's point, a lot of times in church, we hear testimonies in worship time, and they make the testifier sound great.
Yeah.
And how now, thou brown cow. And yet, it's KJV, you wouldn't understand. And yet, true worship brings us lower and him higher.
Right.
And so,
I think that when people testify, like last Sunday evening service, all of the new people to the church, like I thought it was great that they all mentioned a point where they were and like not because of the world is a cruel, ugly place, but because of their own actions, they ended up in a bad predicament, and it's just testifying that no matter how much you shipwreck your own life, God is still right there, willing to pull you out of the mess that you just made.
absolutely. Ways you prove.
I was going to say more of just evaluating my heart, like why, like the motive behind it. Like, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for someone else? Or am I doing it for God? And like what, I guess that's.
Well, that kind of segues into the next question perfectly. How do you prepare your heart for worship?
What I just said.
Felt.
Every time it's just this.
Spaghetti?
It felt.
Spaghetti scare you.
I'm just dropping the pedal.
Spaghetti.
That phrase is already, that's like the money thing.
Well,
That's
like
what it's taking.
Also, crabs.
Crab?
Ravioli.
Yes, so much yes. This is not how we prepare for worship. No.
Unfortunately, this is how we prepare for worship.
Oh.
No, truly and honestly, just keeping your eyes on him, like because I think that's where, and going back to like the more physical, like when you're coming to church, like how many times have you like yelled at everybody in your household about 7,000 times when you got trying to get into the car to come to church?
Yes.
And so it is that thing of like, you only can have true worship if you're focusing on him. You can't. It's not a. Well, I want this out of this. I can worship now because they're playing the song I want.
Right.
They're doing it's just not the way that works. Worship is
That's actually
for him.
anti-worship.
Yeah.
That's actually saying he's not worth it.
Yeah.
Until XYZ.
Yep.
Right.
One of the things I was going to say, so I think what we're trying to get across is that worship should not be defined within the bounds of a church house.
No.
Worship, anything can be an act of worship if it is proving he's worth it.
Yep.
That's
Right.
basically the underlying thing. But to Jamie's point, one of the things that I've tried really hard in my family, and I mean, I've failed miserably, but I've tried really hard, and I don't know that this will catch on. I would love for all the Sandhill folks who tune into the NYC podcast, Mom, to... Huh?
Miguel.
Oh, Miguel.
Christine.
I would love for this to catch on and be a thing. But I work very hard to safeguard Sundays. Saturday nights are not late nights. We are very, like Jenny can tell you to a fault, I make sure we are home by a decent hour.
Yeah.
Juliet's in bed on time. Sunday mornings, we work very, very, very hard, diligently to make it a peaceful morning. If that means getting up a little earlier, if that means playing some music behind us, if that means whatever that means, if that means I got to help, like whatever that means, safeguard Sundays. Why? Not because I want it to be a smooth ride, but because when I get here, I want my head and my heart to be in the right place. Because we know this is the designated hour that our family will worship together.
So could you take that notation and do it every day?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like if you did like instead of it just being on Sundays, like you just like not obviously.
What you're saying is we should go to bed on time every night.
Every night.
I love it
Go to
so
bed.
much.
What is on time for you guys though?
6 p.m. No,
I went to bed at 1:30.
But with you
Oh my
going
goodness.
to bed on time and sleeping on time are two entirely different things.
That's true. How many of you guys sit in your bed and scroll?
No,
on your
not
phone?
me. I just sit there and anger at myself because I can't sleep for a few hours. So I start at 6 p.m., but I don't pause. No, it's
Like 10 o'clock. But truly, that's But truly, that is what you could do all the time. It's just in different ways.
Well, honestly, that is the premise for giving God the first hour of your day or hours. A lot of people argue it doesn't have to be in the morning, and I think there's enough biblical precedents there to set that. But the point of doing that first thing is so that it does set the tone for your day. When you're giving the Lord, when you're safeguarding your Sunday, your Sabbath, your time with Him, it prepares you all day for everything you face to know that you've been with Him and He's with you.
Yep.
That's a fascinating point that you're bringing up, because when I was on one of my several thousand diets, I remember talking to a nutritionist, and they were like, the first thing you eat sets the tone for the rest of your day. Okay. So if you eat a balanced, healthy breakfast, it makes it easier to eat a balanced, healthy lunch and then dinner. Where if you eat a non-healthy...
Are you trying to tell me I can't eat my chocolate Pop-Tarts in the morning?
You.
You don't like chocolate Pop? The Great Value version.
That's even worse. But like worshiping God first thing in the morning is important, because it sets the tone for the rest of your day. It's like you're opening the door and saying, "Come on in, God. We got a long day ahead of us." You know what I mean?
Well, it's kind of like studying after you take the test versus studying before the test.
Right.
Like, that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
So we will have a discount on coffee for all of you who are going to try this for the first time. So I wanted this one more question that I didn't ask. So back to the bounds of, Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock in our church, what we call a worship service. Can you all be vulnerable?
Sure.
What would be something you would really struggle to lay down and it still feel like worship? In other words, what would be something your flesh would be tempted to make an idol called worship that infringes on actual worship? Do you see what I'm saying?
Do you have an example?
So, for example, I know of a couple churches who actually start the service with preaching and end with music.
Oh.
We would struggle with that. Not because it's anti-biblical, not because it goes against God's will, but because we have a tradition, because we are so accustomed to, because we have an idol called worship that we do it in a certain order. We would have a hard time with that here. And so what I'm getting at is, what we call worship is actually an idol, and if he were really worth it, we would do it in any order, shape, or form he asks us to. Do you see where I'm? Do you see what I'm trying to menace? I'm trying to make problems here. So
I'm just trying to figure out
a problem.
Yeah.
So you're saying, what about our service would we struggle with?
Yeah, like if you were honest, like if there was something we took out, something we changed, something we swapped around, something we, what would you struggle with? Y'all super saints.
I'm just trying to think of something that would truly bother me. Like if I came in and everyone was like, "We're gonna do it backwards," I'd be like, "All right, not my favorite, but okay." I'm trying to think of something that would truly irritate me or give me to the point where I couldn't.
Like for some, like even for me, there are types of music that I don't like. So I grew up. I wouldn't say grew up. I went at one
Bluegrass.
point. Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of bluegrass in general.
Right. Right.
But real quick, so
that type of a thing. If we came in and you guys started.
Where I was going with that is I went for a part of my life. I went to a school where it was very formal music. So it was very staccato, very formal, organ-y.
Only piano.
And piano, organ, and it was very you felt like your breath had to be in a Windsor knot. It was very, very, and so that would be hard for me to get over in order to freely worship and experience God.
So when we went to Texas,
and
we went to that church, and they were playing "Eye of the Tiger" for the beginning of the church.
Yes, that is a hard pill to swallow. That is a hard kitty.
It is
to get over.
But they had the fog machines and the lights
right,
with
and
it.
The car.
It all matched, but
again,
it felt weird. I will be honest.
4 minutes. Too far.
When we sat there,
it would be hard to get over that, and yet I truly felt the Lord's presence there in that.
Yes.
And I think the reason is we laid that down.
Yes.
The version of worship we're not used to. We laid that down and saying He's worth it, regardless of what I feel. He's worth it.
I think what's really important too when you're talking about something like that is you can't worry about. So at that time, how old was I at that time?
2017.
It's 2017. So I was.
Here comes the math. 17.
20, whatever I was in 2017. But I cared more about what other people thought of that than what I thought of that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think that could be something that could hinder your worship too, is if you're sitting there and you're like, well, I can't worship because all these people don't like this.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I've had that a couple of times where it's just more of you feel like if you worship, then other people are going to be like, how are you worshiping through that? You know, that
absolutely.
type of thing.
I think that music is such a huge thing in our society as a whole. And if it's not like for someone to enjoy a gospel song or a Christian song, it has to be in the genre of music that they like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if it's not in the genre of music that they like, then they're going to tune it out because they don't like. Okay, but what I've come to understand about the way my brain works, which is probably different than everybody else's, but if it's like I'm not a fan of bluegrass, okay, but if the song was in bluegrass, it forces me to focus more on the lyrics than the music, because I'm like, I don't like the music,
Right.
but let me listen
Well, and even
to
with
what
that,
they really say.
So like yes, music, but even ways of physically worshiping. So like at that same church I was talking about, like if you raised your hand, they'd probably tackle you.
Yeah.
Like that was not acceptable.
Yeah.
But then and so that's uncomfortable. But then I've been to the other extreme where the thing, like I've heard of people charging the aisles with flags. Like they grab the American flag and charge the aisle in the name of worship. Like crazy things like that. Like I'm not
Somebody got
jumping on top of pews, doing jumping jacks, flipping over. Like I've seen crazy things in the name of worship, and they call that worship. And so again, there's nothing wrong. I say this. There is nothing wrong with your congregation, your local body, having what's edifying for you.
Yeah.
That's biblical. I believe the book of the Church of Colossae, the Church of Ephesus, they all these churches were different. However, whenever whenever that difference in how your body, whatever's edifying to you, when that edification becomes an idol, he's no longer worth it of you.
Like you can only worship if it's only in this set.
That's keeping Isaac off the altar, and that's saying that your version of worship is more important than his worth.
Like it's what you're comfortable with. It's your comfort zone.
I've told, again, I'm the stick in the mud who likes to meddle. Meddle is, that's my middle name.
You have a medal for medal.
But I've often told the pastor, like whenever I'll be honest with you, like this morning's worship was difficult. If Rachel's making that face, then you can only imagine how difficult it was.
I just stare at the keyboard.
You scare the keyboard?
I stare at the keyboard. No, I stare at the keyboard.
It was difficult.
Yeah.
I am convinced that a lot of times we become so lethargic and complacent in worship because we're so used to doing 2 songs, prayer request, 3 worship, preaching, altar call, announcements, lunch. We are so used to our routine that we can do it without him. That one of the most healthy things we could do is shake it up and change it up and make our flesh angry enough that we have to let the Spirit be in control and actually cause us to worship, to worth it.
Yeah.
I think that so being the newest member to the church, like I'm probably the most flexible because like what you guys have been doing for some of these I've only been doing for 3 years, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not as traditional.
Right, exactly. And then I'm not like a traditional, like when it comes to like, I'm like, that's what man does, okay? Like I have no time for that. But but I can see where like if we came in and just like do a few things just to keep it, you know what I mean, fresh, then to someone who's like first time they come, they're like, I really like that. I'm going to come back. And it's different. They're going to be like, well, why did it change? Because they don't understand the concept of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
Put it on like a 4-week rotation.
That requires upper management decision.
This may be our first week getting hate mail from Sand Hill.
Well,
Wow.
mail is mail.
Short postage. That's right. I'll
I was
take
going to say, don't waste the money. You can just come talk to us.
It costs money to send the email?
It says postage.
Postage.
Oh, okay.
Costs money to send an email. I mean,
Depends on what city you're in.
does it?
No, I totally just lied about that. Jamie's like, I've been ripping off the IRS all of these years.
Don't tell
Now we're going to get hate letters of the government.
They're knocking on the door.
All right, so one more question for the group. And I guess it's just kind of following up last week's. Here we go, back into our routines. How can you teach your kids not to do formal acts of worship like raising a hand, shedding a tear, but proving in their life that God is worth it? In other words, how can you make sure that when they worship, it's Him being worth it and it's not doing a physical act because that's what we do around here? Do you see the difference? How can you safeguard that, Mom?
I'm not your mom.
And he's not a mom.
It's like, what, 4 weeks in a row? Yeah. I really struggle with this because it's really hard to, like, you want them to do the right thing, but like they don't know how to do the right thing. So you have to teach them to do the right thing, but then if you're teaching them, then they're just doing it because you said so.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a struggle.
That's good. That's good.
That's good.
We're
yeah.
all on the same page.
So you added oil to my fire.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I don't know.
Burn, baby, burn. Okay.
I mean, like not simple. It's simple in saying, not simple in doing, is to be the example of it.
Yeah.
So I think that if your kids see you in church and the only worship they see is in the church house, then they're only going to have the worship they're not going to see that it's a way of life. They're only going to see it in the church, and they're going to be like, okay, that's where you get well, my mom raised her hands on the first chorus, the second verse, and then the bridge. That's where you get that. So I think that if you are living worship in your everyday life, this is
an extension of it.
Yeah, listening to praising God in your what's your thing? The washing the dishes. That's your thing. Your thing is the washing the dishes. Like Juliet sees you doing that, worshiping Him while you're doing the mundane.
Yeah.
I think that's where that kind of starts. I don't know where the full thing comes. There's probably way more to it, but like that's a good step.
That's a very good point, because if you worship God even in the mundane in everything you do, then your child is going to see, oh, there's not a set boundary when to worship. You know what I mean? And then
it makes what you do here authentic when you're doing it out there all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So then they're going to come up with their own way of worshiping. You know what I mean? And
I think that honestly, one of the things, and I'm bad for it, even though my kid's very little. Like, so we're in ministries where you do things, and that's part of worship because it's a sacrifice to be able to be a part of the ministries. But how many times do you get in the car and you're like complaining about it the whole time? Or, whatever. And your kids are going to hear that.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's not teaching them that it's, what I mean? Teaching them that the sacrifice is worth it. You know what I mean? Like that God is worth it to go through those things. So if they bring up something like, that went wrong, you're like, yeah, it did, but that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? Like instead of being like, yeah, you're right, that's bad. You know what I mean? It's a whole attitude change.
Yeah.
And so worshiping during your trials, because even little kids, like they're like, something ain't right around here.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if you can still praise and worship God during your trials, then when they go through a trial, it's so much easier to say to them, because if you're not, if you're walking around stomping your feet, throwing temper tantrums during your trials, you know what I mean? And then your kid loses a game of Uno and they fly off the handle, you can't say to them, that's not how we act, because in their brain they're thinking like, really? Like, that's how you act.
So I think kind of a combination. I think that I use this a lot in family ministry, but patterns and prayers are how we disciple our kids. I think that, yes, them seeing you worship all the time authenticizes what we do here. But I also think that, and I guess this is maybe just auto-correcting from maybe where we grew up in a Christian culture, I think explanation goes a long ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that we just take for granted, like, if they're going to be a part of this body, and this is how we worship in an edifying way here, let's explain what we do and why we do it. Yeah. And then when you see your children starting to do the things that we do as a fact of worship, ask them, are you doing it because you see this, or are you doing it because you understand the reason behind it? Yep. I just think that, and really, in my opinion, that's really the model the Bible gives. You look in the book of Deuteronomy, and there's a lot of things that they were required to do, kind of like you said, like you do it because I said so. Yeah. But there was explanation behind it. And so I guess that would be my thing. Don't ever hinder the little kids from worshiping in a worship service, but let's make sure it's authentic, coming from a life of it, but then also that they understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I grew up like, mom said, let's go, and we went.
You went,
didn't ask where we were going, we just went. And that's kind of the way Christianity was taught to me. It's like, you don't do this because God said so. Yep. You know what I mean? But then as you develop your relationship with Jesus and you have the Holy Spirit, you can understand the whys. Like God literally explains to you the whys. Like last week I said I had a hard time with the Old Testament because I'm like, God, why are you being so mean to these people? You know what I mean? Yeah. But then after reading it for myself, I was like, oh, like,
I kind of deserved that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I forget the details. Like the Israelites off doing something foolish per usual.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the Bible literally says, like, God waited like 200 and some odd years before he responded to what they were doing. But he was warning them at every turn to stop doing what you're doing. So, I mean, I don't think anybody can argue with that.
No.
I think the only way to form true worshipers in our children is to show them true worshipers.
Yep.
And we have to understand it for ourselves, understand that he's worth it, and that everything we can do can be an act of worship if we understand we're doing it because he's worth it.
Yep.
And until we grasp that, we can never instill that in the next generation. And so may that be our challenge today. Today's feature content's an oldie but a favorite around here that we've featured so many times by Jimmy Needham. Clear the stage.
Did you do that on purpose?
Do it on purpose.
It's usually a considerable quote first, and then. Did you do that on purpose?
No, I just typed
That
them
really
as they
hinders me
come.
from worship.
I can't worship now. I can't worship now.
Oh, no. Today's conservative quote, this is making us some hate mail also. Sunday morning in America is the greatest hour of idolatry in the whole week. Paul Washer.
Yep.
He is a live guy. He's still old. He's an old live guy.
Old live guy.
He's in the 60s, I'd say. Today's trivia. So last week's trivia challenge, how many different people wrote the Bible? The answer is A, 40. Today's trivia challenge. The last use of the word worship in the Bible is found in Revelations 22, where John writes that those who worship do what? Give offerings, sing praises, lift their voices, or obey the Bible. Birthday roundup go to Julie Thomas, Shelby Knipp, Harper Boyd, and Bentley Jeffries. Happy birthday. Join us next week as we continue on with Nuggets of Knowledge. Still here.
Only week 2. Still happening.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, write us hate mail.
Or regular mail.
Or regular mail. We'll accept that too. We will. Yes, we will. Until next time, we'll see you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Really?
Yoo-hoo?
That's, what does hot chocolate have to do with anything?
Come back out wearing different clothes.
He said yoo-hoo. No, he said yoo-hoo.
Oh.
Jamie, stay with
It's a
me.
chocolate drink.
That's what I said.
It's not chocolate.
It could be if you warmed it up.
It's not. Milk. You don't warm milk. It does, like water doesn't turn to milk when you warm it.
Listen, we make hot chocolate with water.
Yes.
Which is called yoo-hoo. The chocolate milk is not yoo-hoo.
But it's not chocolate milk.
But if you warm it up,
Hot chocolate's not chocolate milk.
it identifies as. It does. It identifies as hot milk.
Your water.
I'm sick. You can't use this.
He always says that.